In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am really looking forward to speaking with today's guest. He's a passionate entrepreneur that's been starting new ventures since high school. He's a visionary leader dedicated to restoring trust on the internet and has worked on multiple ventures in the privacy space. A few years ago, he helped launch a nonprofit of consortiums of companies in privacy and women's health to help use technology to help protect women's health choices. And he's the brilliant mind behind Footprint, a revolutionary startup that he leads, designed to give enterprises the tools to frictionlessly and securely onboard new users. And they recently raised their Series A funding round. And in his free time, he performs stand-up comedy. Eli Wachs, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Natalie. Really excited to chat, and I hope I can live up to maybe a quarter of that overly kind introduction.
I'm sure you will, and I'm excited as well. So I'd love to dive right in and start talking about, what are the misconceptions out there about driving change in an organization? Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
That sounds great. Let's do it. So I guess, if we want to talk about the biggest misconception, I think it's somewhat of a paradox, but I think that as a leader, you can't expect to just say something and have it be implemented. And I say that for two reasons that are on completely opposite ends of that spectrum. One is that there's a story that I liked that was told a while ago, and it was from the leadership at Twitter when they were growing. And they said, if you're 10 people and you're the leader and you're in a coffee room and you're like, hey, that's like a weird plant, no one's going to do anything. And if you're 50 people and you're in the coffee room and you're like, it's like kind of a strange plant, maybe somebody gets rid of the plant. And if you're 1,000 people and you say, that's a weird plant, you're going to come in the next day and it's going to be a completely new garden in there. And I think the story is to say that sometimes words as a leader are being taken at very literal face value. And to me, that's why I think it's very important to not think that if you just say something, people will exactly know how to interpret that. I think it's easy as a leader to kind of say something more broadly, say, I want the company to be more serious about X, or I want the company to take Y more literally every day. You have to give a roadmap. I think that you can't, as a leader, just take for granted that people will perfectly understand your sentences and they'll exactly act on that. I think that you really need to do a couple of things to really drive change if you want to do it. One is you have to repeat it with purpose. So if I maybe won't take the example of a plant, I'll maybe do a more personal example of building a footprint. Last fall, I called it the fall of maturity. And that means nothing in a sentence. What we meant with, as we were going live with larger and larger customers, we needed to make sure that we were a mature product and that everybody had to really own maturity. And what did that look like? So it's something that I would repeat every Monday, but then it was something that I would give examples for, and I would highlight kind of people who had really done that, whether it's people who had done a more kind of grown the maturity of their code base that they're managing or the part of their product, whether it's on kind of the ops side of formalizing processes within the company so people could feel that the company was actually growing. I think it's really important when you think about wanting to drive something that you make it really an idea that you're not just staying with kind of emptiness. It's something that you're both embodying and then you're giving people very specific roadmaps of how to get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering, how did you get to that conclusion? Were there things that you were seeing that weren't happening, or kind of what brought you to that?
Yeah, I think I personally have a more, laid back management style. And I think that you can frame it in a good way of, hey, we hire really great people and we just let them operate. And that sounds good. And for a while, I thought it was great, but I also think it's a little lazy in a way. Because at the end of the day, you can hire great people, but they need some direction, just like you need some direction. And I think that I started to see that, you can get frustrated of, oh, why aren't people reading my mind? But that's not a fair thing to get frustrated about. So it doesn't matter if you've surrounded yourself with a team of A players. It's still your job to give them the context and really the proper roadmap to succeed, because I think you maybe can take for granted the things that you talk about and are passionate about. One, people are going to pay attention. So they're going to try to act on them, but you need to give proper direction of how to act on them. Or they're going to end up replacing plants in a cafeteria that you actually didn't care about. Or B, they're going to kind of not actually be as aware. So I think for me, it really came from this place of having a style which was, I think, too passive. And it was too reliant on people will figure things out. And that's true to a degree. People will figure things out, but they'll figure them out quicker if you tell them what you actually want them to figure out. And I think that's really the important learning that I had, which was you can be laid back, and people I think really good performers say they don't want to feel like they're overly managed. But that's the key thing. They're not saying we don't want to be managed. And I think that's the important thing is you need that balance, and you still need to actually embody that direction that you're giving.
Yeah, yeah. I like that you have really found your own style, and it sounds like kind of how you've remained authentic to yourself, but also driving the outcomes that you want. And I know that can be a bit of a learning process. And you're talking about, the roadmap and giving the team the roadmap. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into that for you?
Yeah. I mean, when we think about roadmap, it can go in a couple of different ways when you think about driving changes. There's product roadmap, which is probably the most clear in terms of what you're communicating to people. There are then company roadmaps of, hey, we want to hit these milestones by these dates. There are even hiring roadmaps. I do think the more context, the better. I think there can be a fear of, hey, we're sharing product roadmap and then something changes and it's going to feel chaotic. Or we're putting out our company our goals, and what if we don't hit it? I've really never found that more visibility ever leads to a bad thing. If you put out a product and then you kill it, I actually think your team will respect it, that you're honest about, hey, this is something that we thought was going to be interesting. And after learning more, we've decided it's not interesting. I think on the flip side of that, if you put out something that maybe people are questioning, and then you say, no, we're still going to go forward, people once again have more belief because they see, hey, these leaders, they're not always just doing what they think. They're actually being critical. They're sometimes killing their own ideas. They have things with metrics. I think that there were definitely times where I thought we were a bit behind. And you can take that very personally. You can almost try to shield people, but you should keep in mind as you're growing a company, people join for a reason. They knew they weren't joining Google. They knew they were joining something with risk, and they want to be owners of that. And people are only able to help you drive change and hit those goals if they know that you're falling short. And look, everybody's going to contribute in a different way. But I think that visibility is the only way people can even have an inkling of the idea that we do need to do something different, or we do need to double down our efforts. And I think lastly, kind of on a team roadmap, that's another good way where, there's a lot of debate of, call it 3 years ago, it was hire as many people as you can. More recently, it's been have as lean a team as you can. I think the true answer is somewhere in the middle, where you should be hiring where you really have a real pain in the organization. There was never a badge for the biggest team to hit revenue goals. I likewise think we'll soon see that there isn't a badge for the smallest team to hit certain goals. The goal of companies is to grow at the pace that makes sense for them. I think that's where you also really have to trust people, see how people respond to those types of roadmaps. See where people actually genuinely think that they do need to grow. So let me pause there. Bunch of different threads. I may not have even answered the question, but if you'll let me know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think as you're talking about kind of when to hire, when not to hire, as well as kind of the culture around it's okay to fail. I'm wondering if you're seeing or thinking differently about the type of person that you're looking to hire. As the company grows and matures, are you kind of thinking differently about the kind of person that's a good fit at Footprint?
I think culturally, no. We're still looking for, well, with one exception, which I'll maybe give in a minute. In terms of team, I think yes. So to answer both, I'll maybe start with the first one, which is maybe a bit more controversial. which is for a while, I always thought that we want to hire people who culturally are very, very similar and they would all get along well. And I think that is a good goal. I think generally you should try to hire people like that. I also do think I've learned that sometimes exceptional performers, a couple of which I think in hindsight we've maybe passed on, are going to rub people there the wrong way. I think sometimes you can meet very exceptional performers who are pretty independent and who are not the most collaborative. And there are drawbacks there. We've avoided it because we were worried about those drawbacks. But I honestly do somewhat think that those are the people who can still just bring a company forward so much. So we have not changed our hiring philosophy, at least to this day, bringing on people who are maybe a bit more different culturally. But as we grow, I think it's something that I am more open to. In that I think culture, it's not something that you just write down and it happens. I do think it happens top down. I don't think that you can necessarily fully assimilate people into a culture, but I do think that it is your job to bring on incredible people. In terms of then who we're looking for, I think it gets to going back to something a little earlier about pain. Earlier on in a company, that's pretty clear of, hey, we don't have enough front end engineers. We can't complete this dashboard that a customer needs. I think as you grow, pain becomes more of a counterfactual. You raise a series A, you think you have product market fit, you think you have dozens of customers. The pain then becomes, what are we not doing that we could? What does us being more successful look like? I think that startups should feel uncomfortable. I think that you should say, oh my, we have to hit this goal. And I think it's easier, as strange as it sounds, the bigger you get, to feel more comfortable, to feel, oh, we're reaching our goals. And I think it's your job to push back on that. I think it's your job to make yourself feel uncomfortable. I think it's your job to make you say, I'm going to have to defend this to the board in 2 months. That's how I think really great companies get built. And I think that's what changes as you go from saying, this is a very obvious pain and we need to hire someone to fill it, to this is an opportunity. This is a risk and we should try to go for it. And that's why I think it's a little more difficult in that it's not as clear cut. You really have to take that bet. And I think that's the pain that you're solving for, which is you don't want to be there in 6 months and say, we didn't hit all the buttons that we could have hit to try to hit that next level.
Right, right. I like that. And I think I've seen that even you think on kind of a much bigger scale, right? You look at the much bigger companies in the tech space where it's really easy to kind of hide, so to speak, when someone is not kind of contributing or kind of pushing the envelope. At a smaller company, you really feel kind of the key role of each person and needing to kind of move the needle forward. And, we're in environments that are constantly changing, right? So that's by itself is kind of reason enough to stay uncomfortable and continue to look at kind of what's around the corner, not just for the company's growth, but kind of in the field. And you being in privacy, there's certainly a lot happening there.
Absolutely. And I also think it's a very serious job. We see earlier this week, one of the biggest data breaches in history happened. And I feel like it hasn't garnered enough news because people are so jaded to this happening now. There's a real responsibility, I think, when you build any company, but especially one in the privacy or security space. And that's why you have to make sure you're doing it from the right way, I think, the ground up.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. I wanted to also ask you, Eli, about the changes that you personally have driven in the organization as you think about the work that you've done, whether at Footprint or previously. What is the biggest change that you've driven, and kind of what have you learned through that process?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger changes that we've driven here is really how we think about product. I think at the start of the company was a much more rigid roadmap of, hey, we want to be able to, we're looking very far out and we're going to do this. And whatever order happens, there's kind of not really feedback. I think that's natural kind of startups at the beginning. You're building to get to something with customers. I think a big focus that we've had as we've grown as a company is really how do we have a more fluid roadmap, but how do we still make sure that we are still making big bets? And I think that's the tough balance that happens as your company grows, is it becomes easier to just have a very predetermined roadmap because our customers want this. And kind of, our customers said they'll do this and that. And I think it's important for you as a company to still remember that there was a time when you didn't have customers and you were building more based on intuition. What we've really seen is I think, iterated a lot on having no product meetings to too many product meetings. We still don't have product managers at the company. It is a fairly collaborative process. But I think we've said, look, we know this isn't perfect yet. It probably won't be perfect tomorrow, but we're going to keep trying until we feel like we're getting closer to what things should look like. And I think that's been a huge focus, which is how do we get that proper balance of making sure we're always taking a big bet, but also making sure that we're never letting kind of customer needs go unattended.
Yeah.
I think that's something that changes a lot as you grow, just because the amount of resources that you have, you realize that there's only so finite amount of attempts that you can take.
Yeah. And I have a question for you about that because it is a topic that I see kind of coming up over and over with the startups that we've worked with and just in my ecosystem around, right, incorporating customer feedback, but not wanting to be swayed too much by any one customer or too many customer perspectives that kind of pulls you away from a vision that maybe is kind of bigger than any one customer. So how do you think about that?
I think it's a balance. I think you have to be very honest with yourself of, does this company want to use our product for a way that we envision it? And what I mean by that is there are going to be companies that they'll be like, they will have a different way of how to use your product than you have. Now, sometimes that can be good. Sometimes it can be, hey, this is a smart use case. But sometimes it can be, they're really not going to get the value of the product this way. They would be degrading the product, in fact, if they used it this way. And I think that's where you really need to have an honest conversation of, hey, if you want to if you want to use something to do this, we're not going to be the tool. If you want to use us this way, we could be. I think on a similar virtue is the idea of, areas that you haven't yet built that you will, and figuring out who are the best people to build that with. Your product is going to be a reflection of the early customers who used it. And that doesn't just mean year one, because you're going to build something new in year three. And that product's going to look like the early customers who use that. We've increasingly tried to be very smart about which companies do we think will give us the proper feedback to make this product look right. And those will be different sides. Often it's really kind of which engineers we think have lived through the pain of a problem that didn't solve that properly. Normally, that is not a seed stage company, and that they haven't been through enough pain to see that. Normally, that isn't a Fortune 100 company, just in that their use case will probably be a little specific, and that's fair. And you may still want to consider building that for them because of the value they'll bring to you as a customer. But I maybe would not think about that as the generalizable product, in that at that size, you're going to be so specific. So I rolled out maybe two very distant far ends and then left a very big middle of kind of floating. And I think that's fair though, because I think that you, based off your product, you'll figure out, who are in that middle ground, kind of people who we really should be doing R&D with.
Yeah. And what about where do you get the customer feedback? How do you approach figuring out kind of who to go to? Is it just the people that are coming to you? Do you have anything more formalized in place? How do you make sure you're getting kind of honest feedback and it's kind of, as you said, the ones in line with your vision? What do you guys do?
It's a really good point, and that it becomes easy to base your product based off who is slacking you or emailing you requests. And sometimes people may not be doing that, but that may not be because everything's working perfectly. Maybe they're more shy. So I do think it is important to, and it's something we've struggled with, of how do you make sure that you're going to everybody, especially people who you want to make sure you're collaborating with, and saying, hey, we're releasing a new version of this. What do you think? We've sometimes learned the most by reaching out to customers and saying, hey, could we just get on a Zoom for an hour and watch you use our product? We're not going to say a word, act like we're not even there. And we've learned so much in that there's some products where you can use it yourself. We can't really use our product ourselves, and that it really is a tool that other companies have to be using. I think that's something that every time we've watched a customer use Footprint, we've never regretted it. We've always learned a ton. We can't really watch an end user go to Footprint. There's software out there where you can essentially monitor your sessions. I think those are helpful too. So I do think that you should be actively seeking it out. You should be meeting with customers. You should be watching them use your product. That's really the only way that you'll figure it out. Other than that, you're also going to just know which feature set is not as built out. and you're going to know who wants to work with it. And just as a result, you're going to expect there to be fixes and expect there to be requests. I think that it's really important to be radically candid with customers and say, hey, right now, this is not where you're going to need to be. We're going to get it there. We're going to get it there in the timeline you need. And you need to make sure that you're able to deliver.
Yeah, I like the term that, right, the radical candor as you talk about, and that goes for kind of what will and won't be kind of in the product roadmap. But then also I think about kind of the word trust, and especially being in the privacy space as a startup. How do you build trust with your customers?
I don't think there's a playbook there. Uh, all I'd say is trust is built very slowly over time and it's lost very, very quickly. Um, all you, the best thing you can do is be extremely responsive. We have Slack channels with all of our customers. We've tried to create a culture where anybody on the team, regardless of your role, if you see a message, you will immediately reply to acknowledge it. I think it's important just for people to know that you've seen it. And then we have an internal channel where we talk through customer success issues. I'm a huge fan of meeting people in person too. People trust people who they've met. As you're starting off, you have no excuse to not get on the plane and go and meet with all of your early customers. Is going to buy you a bit of room to slip up, which you will, in that they're going to see you not just as a vendor or a tool, but as a person. And that's really important. I really think those are the two best ways that you can build trust. Other than that, you know, a product working is really good. Like there's not a roadmap to that. Uh, that's the goal, and that's what you should do. But that's what I'd say. And then lastly, you should be honest. If you've noticed something, I don't think you need to send them at that exact minute. Hey, something's up, but you should analyze it, figure out what's happening, and then reach out at that moment too. You never want somebody to be alerting you. And that's maybe the final thing. Have internal alerting. You never really want to learn something from a customer. You should be aware of something breaking without them needing to come and tell you.
Well, I think those are some very good tips. So thank you for sharing that. And next I wanted to ask you, Eli, as you think about where you currently are in the business, you personally as the CEO and founder, what are you focused on at the moment? Is there kind of a big priority or challenge that you personally are focused on?
I think personally, it's, I spoke about maturity as a theme of the company last year. Right now, I'm really thinking about accountability. And it kind of goes to this idea of, I think that your biggest competitor often is yourself. It's something I said earlier about hiring of, the pain becomes more so the counterfactual. I think it's similar here, which is, look, you can think about the metrics that you want to hit to raise the next round of funding or that you said you're going to hit in the plan. And those are important. You want to be accountable to that. But more so than that, you want to be intellectually honest with yourself of, okay, even if we hit that metric, where do we actually need to be to hit our goals as a business? What is our vision and what's the actual timeline? Because you'll have gap timelines from a revenue perspective, but I think you'll know that there is a real momentum of the companies and there's a real competition of actual competitors. And there will be a time where bigger companies, if you're successful, try to do what you're doing. You have to be accountable to actually knowing what the real deadline is. And I think that you as the founder are probably the best equipped to actually intuitively be aware of that. To intuitively know, hey, this actually isn't really a challenger. For a while at the beginning, kind of people used to ask me, what do you think about Apple getting involved in the identity space? And I would say I'm just not concerned because one, if they do it, yeah, we're going to be out of business. But two, I don't think they're going to get into the business. And we're now 3 years in and Apple has not made any more progress than 3 years ago. On the flip side, a company like Plaid is the company that people didn't really ask me about 3 years ago. And I said, there will be a day where Plaid and Stripe will get involved here. And that day's kind of come with Plaid now, which is why I've said, we have, I think, 2 years to really beat them. That's how I think about it, which is you are the only one who's actually going to know that answer. And I think that you need to be able to, it's not your job to hide that. It's your job to be honest about that and have the answers to it. And the answers may not be represented in a plan, but it's represented in how you then act about growing out that team.
And how do you stay on top of your competitive landscape, whether it is, those direct competitors or kind of others in the space?
I'm not sure if there's a specific answer. I mean, in general, I don't think you should focus on competitors. You should focus on your product. You're only going to build a good product by build like you cannot worry about what have my competitors built. You have to worry about, am I building the product that customers need? And that does somewhat go to staying on top of competition. And then you should just be aware of, I kind of view it as like a two-step matrix of who are we actually competing with on deals and who are we competing with on vision. You really shouldn't worry as much about who are we competing with on vision. Visions are fake. Visions are not real. Visions are what you tell yourself and your team and investors, and they're what you're going towards. But no customer makes a purchasing decision based off your vision. They may make a purchasing decision based off, hey, we like the direction they're going and that we think they're smart, but they're not using a product to demand that. So in general, I think your product should be informed on just who are you actually competing with on deals today. And then from a vision perspective, that's just what you need to be aware of in terms of what do we actually want to build 2 years from now? What do we want to build 6 months from now? What's going to counter position us to win the market?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very helpful. And you're sharing a lot about of your insights. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you personally. So, what's your background? What do you think influenced you to get into entrepreneurship at such a young age? How did you get into privacy? You talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. In terms of entrepreneurship, I don't think I grew up wanting to be an entrepreneur. Uh, I, I, I find it's often not the best recipe. To just like want to start a company because you want to start a company. I think I did always grow up intellectually very curious. I was like learning about things. And I always liked taking on problems and trying to find a way to solve it. Those do end up gravitating, I think, a bit towards entrepreneurship. In high school, I read a book. It's called Abundance and called X Prize. And it was about kind of the ability to solve, essentially incentivize competitions to pretty much democratize innovation. I was very inspired. I sent him a cold email. He took pity on me and replied. And then I started building a high school version of that. I then went to Stanford for college, really just because, I read about Stanford as this place for entrepreneurs. I think it's somewhat a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't think Stanford does anything maybe in particular. I think they just happen to attract people who want to end up doing that. At Stanford is where I got really interested in privacy because I was there at a time when privacy really became a big issue. Historically, tech was seen as a universal force for good. I was at school at a time when things such as the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened, or the 2016 election happened, and there was misinformation on the internet. That's what got me really interested in privacy, and that it started getting viewed in a very binary lens for the public. And I was just very curious at a root level, what did privacy actually mean on the internet? What could it look like? What were the opportunities? What was going to get built just legally as a result of the laws that were getting passed? And what was going to be bad based off that too? Because I definitely think that not all legislation leads to better tech.
Yeah. And while we're talking about privacy, can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about the space? Where do you see the biggest kind of opportunities and threats in the market? And then how does that impact your company and what you're building?
I think for one, on a privacy landscape, we unfortunately live in this tough social contract of the internet where there almost is no privacy. In that one, you kind of have cookies following you around. Cookies are somewhat gone now, but they're still trackers. The two are root informations out there. So we very much live in the identity world, where in the physical world, it's very tough for somebody to show up at a bank with your information and create an account for many reasons. Because one, they'll actually need to present the document that looks like yourself. Online, that's different. Our information's been breached. Information's out there in troves, and people have access. So when we think about privacy, we really think about that root level of identity. Social security numbers are not a unique identifier anymore. One, they're actually not unique. There are a couple of duplicates. But two, bad actors have them. So very much a big part of our mission at Footprint is how do we actually recreate an actual database of deduplicated authentic identities? On the other end of the spectrum, I actually don't think targeted ads are the worst thing in the world. I think it's far worse that people may create a credit card in your name and give you a bad credit score than you get an ad for a t-shirt that you may or may not be interested in. I think there have been examples of bad targeted ads and things that I think cross bad moral and ethical lines. I think data brokers are not companies that should really exist. I don't think there should be companies that are just selling lists of recently divorced people, or people with kids who are single. Like, I think that's creepy and it's weird, and it's not right. I think what we focus on is what I think is a very root issue of how do we make sure that online, nobody can take your identity because it's much tougher to do it in the real world.
Yeah. And I'm curious how that's shaped, which market segments or verticals you go after, the place where you're focused within the space.
Yeah, it's you should build companies in spaces that I think are their dollars being spent. Or at least I'm not smart enough to start selling in a fully greenfield market. Where we focus is something where legally companies do need to spend money. And that, once again, the cost of messing up an identity is fraud. And you're going to lose a lot of money as a business. So businesses will pay for companies to do this right. From a pure consumer privacy perspective of tracking, there's not as much of that there. There isn't as much of a market of companies that maybe cares much about that. And I think it's reflected in why I think it's maybe less of a grave, immediate thing to solve. So for us, I think it should be somewhat hand in hand. Ideally, kind of the bigger problems are the ones where people actually are impacted on a monetary basis. And that's why there's a market to really go and solve it.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. So, tell me more about Footprint. We've talked a bit about what the company does, but tell me a bit more about the organization and are there any kind of transformations or changes you're helping your clients go through?
Upfront, we say we're an onboarding company. What we mean by that is we give our customers UX components to collect information about their end users, verify it, and securely store it. You can think of us like a Stripe for identity for our customers and Apple Pay for identity for consumers at the end of the day. In terms of what we help our customers with, we often work with companies that are growing, and they are being hit with fraud. And that is unfortunately kind of just a side effect of bringing finance online. There are going to be some bad actors who take charge of it. Footprint really brought in as a tool to help bring that in. We try to give companies a simple toolkit to immediately plug in and reduce that funnel. We try to let companies focus on building their product, and have less worry about the risk and fraud that comes with it. I think one of the great things about technology is it lets companies focus on their core focus. Footprint, we are an identity and risk company. We're not a cloud warehousing company. We're luck. We take advantage of the ability to use things like AWS. And I think it should be similar about fintechs or rental companies where they want to focus on their core focus. So that's really what we build and how we help companies.
Great. Great. Thank you. And, on the topic of transformation, I'm wondering if there are any personal transformations that you've been through that have helped shape your leadership approach.
And I think really building a company is a humbling experience, and it's one that makes you reflect a ton on what you want to do and where you want to be. It's easy. I wrote a blog the other day about bad reasons to start a company. And I think one thing I had on there was, the idea of never being satisfied or always having a chip on your shoulder. And that's totally fine. That is a reason that'll motivate you and get you to work hard. It's not something you're going to solve. You're always going to have another milestone you can hit. There will always be another funding round, another revenue target. And I think something I've really learned is that if you're only focused on that end goal or that milestone, you're never going to be happy because there's always going to be another one. So really, how do you celebrate the small wins? How do you actually enjoy the journey? How do you not just define life as that one end milestone? That's going to make you, one, enjoy things more. Two, actually think will make you more successful in hitting those milestones because you're going to be happier along the way and you're going to be able to think in more of a long-term view when your worldview isn't just reduced to how do I hit this one milestone. That's what I'd really said there.
Yeah. And is there anything that you do kind of explicitly to help celebrate the small wins, remember to celebrate them, or does that come more naturally to you now?
I journal every day. I write down one thing that happened each day that I'm happy about. And I find that the act of actually physically writing something down, even if you have terrible handwriting like myself, is helpful.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. I guess both with the handwriting and the journaling. For me, kind of daily gratitude is kind of a way to celebrate both the small things and the big things, and then The key is to then remember to share that with others.
Yeah.
Is there anything different in kind of your entrepreneurial journey, kind of post raising a Series A? I know that's kind of a big milestone to hit for a company.
I don't think anything radically different. You get social capital. I think it allows you to go out and try to open more doors. But the goals really, the jobs that should be getting done shouldn't change. The problem that you're solving for your customers should still be the same, just ideally at a bigger scale. So you really shouldn't think about it as we're now a Series A. That's the title on a paper or an article. It doesn't really change where you're actually at or what you need to do.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier about kind of pushing yourself and kind of being uncomfortable, I guess, in certain situations by pushing yourself. Curious, like how do you keep yourself growing, learning, etc.? Are there any like any content that you consume, anything else that you do personally on that regard?
In terms of content, I'm not the biggest podcast person of, the all in pod to talk about it. You're going to get a crash course every day in things on your journey. I actually go the other direction. I try to read fiction books in free time. Just expand your mind. There's a huge world other than the company that you're building. And I actually think the best way that you can get better at that is to realize that it's still a small thing in the world. And that there's so much other things to life to learn about. So I don't have a specific podcast recommendation or book about building a company, and that I think most things you kind of need to experience. I've had older founder friends say, you're going to make this mistake. Don't do it. And I went and I actually still made that mistake because I kind of needed to learn it myself. I think early investors are really good with this. They're like, we're kind of going to let you make a mistake instead of tell you, because you will be a lot better in the long run if you experience this and felt it on a smaller scale. So I somewhat think that you can't really prepare to avoid mistakes. You somewhat need to make them, but then iterate quickly.
Yeah. I have a quote I used to be one of my favorites, that no one learns from other people's mistakes. And I still love that and have experienced that myself. But also do try to see what I can learn from others. But then sometimes, to your point, you really do need to make your own mistakes and then be that much wiser the next time around.
I'm fully with you there.
Yeah. Yeah. So curious, like on the fiction front, or the books that you read, anything, any favorites or any recent reads that you would recommend?
Once I just read the book A Gentleman in Moscow, which was recommended by an investor. They recently made it into a TV show, but it's fun prose, a world away. My favorite book's called A Shadow in the Wind, which is once again based in post World War II Barcelona. You'll learn nothing about building companies in it, but you'll maybe be reminded about hope and dreams, which are very important to building a company.
Yeah, yeah. It is amazing how you can draw parallels and you just never know where new ideas or thinking come from the content we consume, the information that we surround ourselves with.
Yeah, I think books are mirrors. So regardless of what you pick up, you will see your world reflected.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you. And I have another question for you that's really around, what advice would you give your younger self when you were in your first ever leadership role?
I think it goes to, I'll maybe do two things. One, going back to something I said a couple minutes ago, of I think for your younger self, just being present on that journey. If you're in a management role, you're going to feel like there are all these big things happening, and you're going to say, well, obviously I'm growing because I'm going through them. And I don't think that's actually true. I think it's very easy to actually be a passenger when there's so much going on. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think more broadly, uh, good management isn't always passive. Like I said at the top, you sometimes need to actually manage different people in different ways, and don't just expect people to conform to you. It's your job to conform to them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And before we wrap, would be interested in how you got into stand-up comedy, a little bit on the personal side.
Yeah, I've always loved telling jokes. A couple of years ago during COVID, I DM'd a famous comic to come and do a show on our roof at the time, and he came, and I was somewhat cajoled into opening for him, and it went well, and I was encouraged to go out more. I found it a very good mental health activity to go and do stand up comedy, and that it's nice to get away from the world of tech and kind of company building, and just work on a very different art form of kind of just telling stories in a very different way. I'm kind of done with trying to act like there are parallels between that and running a SaaS company. But I think there's something about just being a real human.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And can you tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, my name's Eli Wachs. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. Our website's onefootprint.com. Feel free to follow us along. And always happy to chat the fun world of privacy or identity.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Eli. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time to come join our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And thank you to everyone listening. I know I loved hearing from Eli and how he gets feedback from his customers, how he thinks about privacy and kind of what's happening in the space. And so if today's episode gave you valuable insights, and I'm sure it did, please share it with someone. Sharing this kind of knowledge and information helps all of us grow as leaders and really sets us up to drive successful change and transformation and innovation in our organizations. So thanks again, Eli. And this has been another great episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. Awesome. Thank you, Eli.
Thanks so much for having me on, Natalie.
That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.